This is Jeffrey Tucker, Brownstone Institute. You know, at the height of COVID, there was a very popular meme that went around where they would ask an Amish farmer, how is it that you guys did so well during the COVID years? And the response was that they don't have TVs. That was all over the internet. It always made people laugh because we all knew there was a grain of truth to it. A lot of the panic was manufactured really from the very early days. I remember waking up February 27th, 2020, and turning on the New York Times podcast, and there was Michael Barbaro interviewing Donald G. McNeil, and he arrived at the interview squirting sprays of hydrogen peroxide all over the surfaces before he would even sit down, and announced that this pandemic would be much worse than 1918, and they spent 30 minutes whipping up disease hysteria like I had never heard it before. And I had meanwhile noted that nothing like this happened at the New York Times in 1958, 59, 1968, 1968, 69, 1957, 58, during the polio epidemic, going all the way back. The New York Times always said the same thing: calm down, see your doctor if you get sick. We've got this under control. Medical science is good. But not this time. It was completely different. And in those days, they were calling it a coronavirus. But that sounds a little bit familiar because one variety of coronavirus is, of course, the common cold. You can't have that. So it was renamed, COVID, which just sounds like a disease with which we'd never had any experiences before, brand new, no cures available. I mean, that wasn't true. We've dealt with respiratory infections like this for centuries, if not forever. We had methods of dealing with these kinds of things, but the implication was that this is a novel. I kept saying a novel pathogen. Well, in some sense, every pathogen is novel, especially every mutating pathogen with a zoonotic reservoir is a novel in some sense. So that wasn't exactly unique, but it was all the things were put together. We have a new name, a novel virus. We've got to have a brand new cure. We've got to invent an inoculation. And the whole world collapsed into madness. And when I say the whole world, I mean the whole world, 194 countries locked down mostly at the same time. To what? In order to what? To scare the pathogen away so that we wouldn't get sick, so we could avoid it. That's what we always think we're trying to do with diseases, is to run away from them. And then if we all just run far enough, fast enough, hide under our sofas or whatever, then the virus will give up. The R naught will collapse below 1 and it'll disappear from the world. I mean, that's never happened to a virus in the history of humanity. So especially not something like this, that's always mutating and finding new subjects. Very intelligent virus. Dumb viruses kill their hosts. Smart ones hang around for a long time. This is a very smart virus. But once it had a name, that was it. And it reminded me of a comment that Mark Twain had said in a letter to a friend. He said, we're all born with a fatal disease that's going to kill us. And pretty much everybody's okay with that. And we don't talk about it, and we live the best lives we can, and then we're dead. But if somebody comes along and names a pathogen and says, here's what it's called, suddenly everybody loses their minds. So this is what Mark Twain said. That is exactly what happened in this period. Well, I have my guest today, Alan Cassels, who turns out to be one of the top. He's a Brownstone Fellow, I will add. He also happens to be one of the world's experts on disease mongering, and I've brought him here today. Good to have you with us today, Alan. Thank you.
It's excellent to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And you've written the book ABCs of disease mongering. There you go. Right.
Yeah.
And many delightful essays on Brownstone. So this is your time. You've been on this beat for how many decades?
3, at least, since getting into this work in 1994. So 32 years. And it's wonderful because there's something new every day. Something new every day. The disease creation just doesn't stop. Yes.
Yeah. I loved your article, the most recent article on Brownstone about like, can we save the doctor's time for actually sick people, right?
Yeah. It
And
was
you
a little
just,
tongue in cheek, but I was also serious too. I'm not the only scholar who's kind of weighed into this, the amount of effort that gets put into focusing on healthy people when the people who actually need doctors and possibly need drugs are perhaps pushed to the side.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure if you said this in your article, but I think you did. Um, this whole idea of a wellness checkup. This is fairly new, I think, and it seems like it's just a sales funnel.
You know, Jeffrey, so the annual checkup has been studied quite rigorously since about 1975. And the question being, do people who go to their doctor when they're perfectly healthy every year for an annual checkup, it's like getting your oil changed or, your fluids checked, do they live longer and healthier lives? And when you study that in a good controlled trial, you find actually the opposite. People who submit themselves to the wellness check are actually people who become more and more worried about their health because suddenly they're living, a life under a dark cloud because somebody told them you have a high cholesterol or your blood pressure is borderline or your bone density is is possibly not what it should be. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who've looked at the annual health check and said we shouldn't be doing that because you're basically medicalizing healthy people. So what I'm saying is that if you are actually sick, you actually have symptoms of something and you need to get it checked out, by all means, get to your doctor. But if you're an otherwise healthy person living a normal life, the doctor visit is not going to make your life better.
And part of the purpose here, I'm sorry not to jump to the conclusion of your thesis here, but is to sell product, right? I mean, so we got statins for whatever. I don't even know what they're for. Actually, I don't know anything about statins, but
Can I tell you a little bit about statins?
Yeah, tell me about it.
I actually think it's probably the most interesting. This was our book, Selling Sickness. If you got 10 minutes to go to a library, read the first chapter because we capture all of the techniques in which are used to sell sickness around cholesterol lowering. And they discovered more than 40 years ago that high cholesterol had a slight association with the tendency to have a heart attack or stroke. So it was considered to be a risk factor. And it's gone on from being a risk factor to being a disease in and of itself. And, we documented it, 20 years ago that the guidelines around when you should get your high cholesterol, your cholesterol tested have been changing over the years. In the late 90s, the level at which they set high, and of course the level it's a human creation. They can set it at wherever they like. They set it at a certain level in the late 90s, and something like 13 million Americans would have been defined as having high cholesterol and may have warranted treatment. Treatment being a drug like, Lipitor or something like that, Crestor, those kinds of drugs. They changed the definition in about 2001, and overnight, instead of having something like, 13 million Americans or so defined as having high cholesterol, it went up to 36 million Americans. That was just the definition change. That it's not like people suddenly were under a great new understanding of what cholesterol lowering was doing. It was that if the companies realized that if they put their own people on the committees that decide the guidelines, they can lower the level to any point at which it expands the pool of patients. And so you went from 13 million people, Americans, to something like 36 million Americans. Okay, so fast forward 20 years. So it's 2026. The American Cardiology Association, the American Heart Association came out with a new set of guidelines just earlier this month. And they are a fascinating study in the creation of disease because according to the recommendations around when you should be testing somebody for high cholesterol have changed. Instead of just testing older people, we should be testing younger people. We should be screening children. We should be getting people to submit to a cholesterol test every 5 years. And the level at which they set the LDL target, this is a kind of low density lipoprotein, is about 100. Something like 25% of the American population has an LDL level that's over that. So if you do the math, the new definition of high cholesterol is about almost 100 million Americans, about a third of the population. This is a massive market. So I've been asking my friends in the cardiology world, like, what's going on here? Why is the industry and these organizations back on cholesterol? And the reason is just so obvious, Alan. It's because there's so much money in it. Because there are new cholesterol lowering drugs. There are new ways to take healthy people and turn them into candidates for which they would be getting a drug prescribed. Now, I think cholesterol is one of the most absurd examples of the selling of sickness. But there's very little mainstream criticism of, I was just reading a story in preparation for this interview. I was reading a story in the New York Times where they're reporting this wonderful new world of cholesterol testing in children. And isn't it great that these cardiologists have come up with these new guidelines that are suddenly recognizing how dangerous high cholesterol is? Well, the danger of high cholesterol has not changed. It's a small risk factor. When I say small, if you take a cholesterol lowering drug and you're considered in a high category, you take a cholesterol lowering drug for 10 years, it might reduce your risk of having a heart attack or stroke by about 1%, if you're lucky. And about 20 to 25% of the people who take the drug will not be able to tolerate it because of the adverse effects of muscle weakening and so on. So, we're talking a drug that has extremely low yield and a high likelihood of being harmed.
I'm suddenly as you're talking, I'm thinking about this. Something that, the COVID years taught us all so much, right? But that's why you're a Brownstone Fellow, because it turns out you're a longtime expert in all this kind of stuff. So what you're describing here fascinates me. It's an industry that has a long history and is very well practiced at inventing maladies using diagnostic tests in order to sell product, right?
Absolutely.
Something like that. Okay.
Yeah.
So when COVID hit, we had new tests that were called PCR tests, and they detect the presence of a certain pathogen. And one very insidious little step that was taken that I recognized pretty early on was that they conflated data on exposure with infection with cases. So it was all just one big soup, right?
Yes.
Which was weird, because in the whole history of the entire modern history of public health, we strictly distinguish between these three things, but suddenly they're all in one. And even the charts that you would see at Johns Hopkins and our world and all the other dashboards you'd see that were chronicling the spread of this virus, they're always called cases. But cases have been traditionally medically significant, marked by hospitalization. You have to see a medical professional to kind of get through it. Suddenly, a positive PCR test. And then the New York Times ran an article that had sampled a lot of the PCR tests coming out of Boston. Mm-hmm. And the New York Times, which sometimes told the truth, even in those days, concluded that 9 out of 10 of these COVID positive cases were medically insignificant. So like it meant nothing but, and that was just one batch they looked at. So it turns out, that what we were seeing in these charts wasn't actually reflective of any kind of reality whatsoever. And then you look into it and you realize, oh, you can adjust the cycle rate on these whirly machines to cause anything to seem to have COVID, including a mango or whatever.
Right.
So, and it all just seemed unbelievable. I remember thinking, if you have the right tools, you mash together exposure with cases, mash together infections with cases, turn up the cycle rates high enough, and then misclassify deaths, you could manufacture the existence of a pandemic without the reality. I mean, a terrifying, crazy thought. And I remember thinking, that can't be right, because no one could ever think of that combination of schemes to play together well enough to be able to pull off such a wildly implausible conspiracy. Now you're kind of telling me this is normal.
This actually makes me think of something that's even more egregious than that, even as egregious and as appalling as that is. And this comes back to my idea of risk, right? So if someone says that you are at high risk of something, like you got high cholesterol, you are at high risk of having a heart attack, what you need to be able to do is define it, quantify it. How high is my risk? Well, let's say I'm a healthy 60-year-old guy that I don't smoke, normal blood pressure, but I got high cholesterol. My risk of having a heart attack, say in the next 5 or 10 years, might be 6 to 8%. We can lower that maybe by 1%. So that might be the benefit of a cholesterol lowering drug. But what happened during COVID is everyone said, you're at risk of dying from COVID. And it's like, well, just hang on a second. And this is what I looked into before I would even consider looking at the vaccine, is what was the nature of the disease itself. And so you have to get into stuff called things like IFR, the infection fatality rate. So how many people of your age and of your sort of general health died from getting COVID? And when you ask people, they so exaggerate their sense of danger that they don't think straight. So, but if I were to tell you, Jeffrey, say you're a 70-ish man, you're relatively healthy, your likelihood of getting COVID and then dying from COVID, they calculated this, and it might have been around 2 or 3 in 10,000. You say, well, that's a small risk. You're, as you mentioned, your risk of death eventually is 100%. But you want to stop premature death. But you have a 3 in 10,000 or 8 in 10,000. If you're a little bit older, it might be higher. It might be 10 in 10,000. It might be 20 in 10,000. Still, we're not talking about a condition that you get and you have an 80% chance of dying from. So this fear and places like the New York Times or the Washington Post, they never really actually got into the numbers about how little the death rate would be among mostly healthy people. Yes, it was a little bit higher among elderly people, but they're going to die from all kinds of stuff earlier and faster than the rest of us. And of course, amongst children, the risk of COVID for a fatality was almost non-existent. But, us middle-aged people, we bought this fear, and without it really asking, what is the likelihood of being hurt? And so if you don't understand your basic risk in a quantifying way, then a vaccine is not going to make any sense. Because if your risk is only 3 in 10,000, how much can we lower that by? We can maybe lower it by 90%. Still, your risk is completely so infinitesimally small. Your likelihood of benefit is almost zero.
Yeah, and a lot of this comes down to the language we use. Exposure, which can lead to natural immunity, even if you're asymptomatic, as they say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have an infection. It's like, yeah, kind of feel cruddy for a few days, but you don't go to the doctor. Then you have actual serious things. Oh, get me to the doctor right away. I'm having a medical emergency. But I remember when Fauci was testifying for the Senate. This is in February, quite late in February. And he was testifying to the U.S. Senate, and he said, we're estimating he called it the mortality rate of this coronavirus is estimated 2 to 3%.
Right.
And I remember watching this and seeing a chill go over the entire room, right? So what that meant was there were 100 senators there, and everybody showed up for this one, right? They don't show up for anything else. They showed up for this one. And it meant that they're thinking, wow, 3 of us in this room are going to die.
Yeah.
Which is a weird thing to think. But it never occurred to any of these birds to ask, wait a minute, what do you mean by mortality rate? I mean, you're saying that if I'm exposed to COVID, I've got a 3% chance of, I've got a 3 in 100 chance of dying from it. I mean, are there any other conditions? Do you want to flesh that out a little bit for us, Dr. Fauci? He didn't have to. Nobody even asked any questions. They're like, oh my God.
Yeah. But again, another way to look at that is that you could say, oh my God, I have a 3% chance of dying. Or you could say, look, I got a 97% chance of not dying from COVID. If I'm a gambler, I'm going to go for the 97% instead of the 3%.
Alan, you just made me realize something. Back when I used to be a smoker, and by the way, I quit because it made me feel like hell. But when I was a smoker, I read somewhere that that smokers have something like a 1 in 10 chance of dying of lung cancer, and I thought, I'll take my chances.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned that. So most people will believe, again, I wrote this book about medical screening, right? And I have a whole chapter on lung cancer screening. And, the U.S. government funded a major lung cancer screening trial. We're talking 15 years. No, it's more than that, probably 20 years ago. Like 40,000 patients in the trial. And of course, when you have a trial that big, the benefit is so small. They have to enroll 40,000 patients. And these people were called 30-pack year smokers. So to get into the trial, you had to smoke a package of cigarettes a day for 30 years. Okay? And so what would you think? So the trial was, I think, 3 to 4 years. It was about 3 years long. How many people, and they were, middle-aged people, like to smoke, a pack a day for 30 years. It takes a while. So the people in their 60s and 70s, right? How many of those people in that 3-year period died of or had a diagnosed case of lung cancer, do you think?
I don't know.
It was like 6%. So even the category that you would think 30 years of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, your likelihood of developing cancer over a 3-year period is way smaller. Most people, when you ask them this question, they would think, oh yeah, the likelihood of getting cancer is going to be 80%, 90%.
Yeah.
Most smokers die of other things, by the way. Lung cancer's on the up the list, but a lot of them get, COPD and heart disease and all kinds of stuff, right? But in terms of just lung cancer, so the actual benefit of screening people for lung cancer, even super heavy long-term smokers, is almost non-existent too. So
it seems amazing. I mean, smoking is cool. It keeps you thin and all that kind of stuff, but you can't do it for that long. I mean, because it'll eventually just break down your body. That's why I quit. But
I'm not advocating for smoking. What I'm advocating for is for people to have a good statistical idea what kind of risks they're under.
Right. And isn't it funny, as an aside, we're such crazy people, you hear so-and-so died. Oh, it's too bad. What did he die of? Why do we ask that question? It's not because we have this powerful sense of empathy. That's not it. It's because we want to make sure we didn't do whatever killed that guy. Why did he die? Oh, he died of lung cancer. And what's the very next question?
Was he a smoker?
Smoker.
And then they shake their head and say, yep, yeah. What if he died by a heart attack because he got hit by a bus on his bicycle? Oh man,
So you think, well, I'm not a smoker. I got to live another day. That's great. The entire question is entirely self-regarding. Anyway, now did you write about this, or I see an interview with you about the osteoporosis?
Oh, don't get me going about.
No, well, just go ahead. Let me get you going there, because I mean it's a fascinating thing.
So I have to tell you, the first study that I worked on when I out of university was a study looking at consumer drug information around osteoporosis, and I didn't know anything about this disease. I had to talk to experts. I had to read a bunch of books, and then I understand. I found something that's fascinating, is that if you live old enough, if you live long enough, your bone density will reduce as you age. Your bones will thin. It's a natural course of aging. It's more pronounced in women, and so they're more at risk of having thinner bones. But the question, of course, is, can we change the course of a person's trajectory in terms of their bone health? And the smart minds in the pharmaceutical industry and people at the World Health Organization got together in about 1993 or 4 and hammered out the definition of bone density. And then they did it in a way that said any woman who had a bone density that was 2.5 standard deviations below the mean are defined as having this disease. And at the time, I know myself and other researchers were going, well, that's absurd. The mean is set at somebody who's 35. So they're taking 80-year-old women, 75-year-old women. They're comparing their bone density to when they were 50 years younger. And they're saying, oh, you have low bone density, you have a disease now. So that was a major flag for me. And I thought, okay, but the next shoe that dropped was the company that was involved in this meeting, Merck, had basically gone around and bought up all the bone density testing machines and distributed them in clinics and hospitals all over the US and Canada, because and I interviewed the PR, a person in New York who's a very high executive in the public relations world, who did the campaign for Merck to introduce this new condition, osteoporosis, that everyone had to be scared of now. And she said, the problem was when we did our focus groups at the beginning, no one could understand, no one knew what osteoporosis was. So we had to educate the public. Okay, that's what you want. You want a drug company educating the public about this new disease for which they're going to make gazillions. And they came out with a drug. It was the first of many, a drug called alendronate, also goes by the name Fosamax, and it was a blockbuster. But that wasn't the most. So let me tell you the last. So,
just to review. So yeah. you now you have a new disease with a great new name, osteoporosis, that everybody can kind of say and remember. Yeah. But then also you have a special machine to discover it, where you didn't have that previously. So now you've got a machine, and now you've got a popular campaign to warn everybody about the dangers of osteoporosis. Absolutely. And a machine to. So you've got the perfect structure of production to sell.
Right. And you've got half the population scared shitless about falling and breaking a hip, because every woman knows someone when they're 70 or 80, they fall, they break a hip, and that's kind of the beginning of the end. They become bedridden, hospitalized, they get an infection, they die. I mean, it doesn't always go like that, but that's falling and breaking a hip is a fairly serious problem in long-term care facilities. You want to stop old people from falling and breaking their hips. So one of the things you might do, well, let's make sure that their bones are denser. Mm-hmm. So the major trial of this drug, and I use this when I do presentations to students around, what we call relative versus absolute risk reduction, because this is the best example ever. In the major trial of Fosamax, we're talking 4 years long. There were 4,000 women who are defined as having osteoporosis. They had had a previous fracture. They had maybe broken a wrist or an arm or something. They have low bone density. They're defined as having osteoporosis. They're in the trial. Half of them get the placebo. Half of them get the drug. They follow them for 3.5, 4 years. And then they say, okay, well, how did these groups do? Well, the women that were taking the drug, or the women on placebo, they had a 2% rate of hip fractures. Okay. It is what it was. 2 out of 100 women in that group who took a placebo for 4 years had a hip fracture. The women who took the Fosamax, it was 1 in 100. So when you go from 2 in 100 down to 1 in 100, that's a 50% drop. And the advertisement in all the medical journals, in the consumer reports, was a 50% reduction in hip fractures. But really, the difference was 1%. 2 down to 1 is a 1% difference.
This so, percent of a percent racket was very helpful to Pfizer and Moderna when they were marketing their COVID.
Absolutely. And you know, the sort of bamboozlement with statistics is, as you know, rife. But in the osteoporosis world, it got everyone excited because, oh my God, a 50% reduction, thinking that, you know, if you give the drug to 100 women, you're going to have 50 of them prevented from having a hip fracture. When the truth was, you give them to 100 women, you follow them for 4 years, high risk, very high risk women, not like the average woman, they're high risk women. And you'll prevent 1 case of hip fracture. Yeah,
so this is a gold mine for pharma, and the way they do their studies. They were popping champagne corks at those results, even though they might just be statistical noise.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's a lot of people who have criticized these trials, and then, of course, when the drugs started getting used, that's when you saw the problems. It's kind of like the vaccine. Yeah, the vaccine sounds great in the clinical trials, even though it didn't actually look that great in clinic. They could paint a nice, you know, they could put the lipstick on the pig there. But with the osteoporosis drugs, you know, it took a while until the drugs were used by tens of thousands of people that they started to discover, oh, there's a pretty serious problem with the drug, that it causes a fairly serious corrosion of the esophagus. In fact, the burning of the esophagus, the instructions on the bottle were you had to take the drug and stay upright for half an hour. Because if you get the drug lodged in your esophagus, it could burn a hole in your esophagus. There's warnings on these drugs. That's one of a range of problems with that class of drugs. I mean, the other thing too, of course, the drugs have been now on the market for 30 years, and guess what they're discovering? Hate to say it, but they're discovering that the women who've taken the drug for a significant period of time, that they actually have a higher risk of breaking a bone, because it actually doesn't, their bones might be somewhat more dense, but they're more brittle, and they're more likely to break. So there are recommendations about stopping these drugs. And plus, you know, if you ever go to a dentist and the dentist asks you, have you ever been diagnosed with osteoporosis? The reason the dentist is asking you that is because one of the serious adverse effects with osteoporosis drugs is osteonecrosis of the jaw. Your basically jawbone falls apart, and they don't want to do any dental surgery on anyone who's been taking these drugs.
This is the difference between iron and steel. That's what just occurred to me just now, because when steel came along, nobody could believe that it would ever replace iron, because it just, iron seemed like a stronger thing, where steel, you know, bends, you know. So so what osteoporosis is very interesting. What other diseases can you think of that fall into the category of, oh, here's our new name, here's our new diagnostic test?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole subcategory of diseases in the mental health world, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So
basically everything, right? I mean,
yeah. I mean, we could do a whole program about ADHD, okay, which is kind of the flavor du jour these days. But also, there's no way to measure, like biologically, whether a person has attention deficit disorder. It's done through questionnaires, through subjective opinions of clinicians, and you know, as you can imagine, there's lots of controversy in taking rambunctious children, boys mostly, who are not really good at sitting down and shutting up, and then saying to them, or saying to their parents, your child is should be taken to the doctor and get assessed, because he might have this brain condition called attention deficit disorder. I mean, I think that condition itself, I would call it the gateway drug. It's the gateway condition. It's kind of the first condition for which you give pills to children that aren't say antibiotics or say cold and flu remedies. These are drugs that children take chronically, and we do know that starting kids down the road for treating them for attention deficit disorder, the drugs often stop working. Then they move on to something else, like perhaps an SSRI antidepressant. There's a range of problems with giving antidepressants to children, as you can imagine. And then some of those kids will move on to even stronger drugs like antipsychotics. So that first pill is the beginning of the cascade for many children, certainly children who are in foster care. Parents want the best for their children. They want them to be able to do well in school. But again, that's one of the falsities that have been promoted by the pharmaceutical companies and the psychiatrists who work for them, is that if you manage to medicate your child's behavior, then they will do better in school. They will be more likely to graduate, go on to a good college, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a kind of believable narrative, which happens to not be true. In fact, when they do longitudinal studies of children who are prescribed ADHD drugs, they do worse on a whole range of metrics, including becoming more involved in illicit drugs. So,
what is that drug that college students love to take that makes them believe that they're performing mightily and fabulously on tests and things? What's that called? Adderall.
Oh, probably Adderall, yes, but yeah. It's a cousin to Ritalin, which was the one of the first ADHD drugs. Yeah.
Yeah, and I read a study the other day that it turns out the main effect of Adderall is to make you believe that you're performing at a very high level, but actually, in fact, you're doing simple tests of people on Adderall versus not. It turns out they're actually performing worse because well they can do it with a great deal of frenzy and elan. They're not actually doing it with any degree of precision.
Yes, and one thing that we've certainly noticed, I mean, say in the last 5 or 10 years, is that the influence of social media and kind of influencers, or whatever you want to call content providers, people who basically go online and do testimonials about their experiences with drugs. I mean, that has definitely sold this idea that ADHD is a kind of a cool thing. You've got it, you can get the drug, and it's partly under this umbrella of, we should destigmatize mental health problems. Fair enough. Though they're making it kind of cool, like punk rock, right?
If you're maladjusted, that means you're right and society's wrong, And
yeah.
So you've been marginalized in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some other examples? I talked to you the other day about writing an article about this. When I was a kid, I got a throat infection. The doctor decided I had tonsillitis, and next thing you know, they're tearing them out. And it turns out tonsillectomies have been common since the 1930s, and apparently I was the last of the tonsillectomy people. Yeah. The generation that came right after me, they stopped doing it because it turns out, I guess, tonsils actually serve a really important function for absorbing pathogens in a way that you can get to them cleanly and clearly with a saltwater goggle or something like that. And without them, you've suddenly got sinus infections, you've got all kinds of things. Yeah. What happened with that? What do we know the history of the tonsil? Who?
Yeah. I mean, I know it peripherally. I haven't done the deep dive on it yet, but you're right. It was introduced probably in the 30s or 40s, and even at the height of when I was a school child in the sort of early 70s, everybody was getting their tonsils out. It was almost like a cool thing. And my mother, who was a nurse at the time, said, no, she called bullshit on that. We're not doing that. If you have a throat infection, then gargle with, I don't know, salt water or whatever home remedy she had at the moment. But this is kind of in the category of what I would call the medical reversal. So something that was hugely popular. Then they finally did a study. Believe it or not, they finally did a study. And I think this was probably in the late 70s or early 80s. And the study found, those kids who have throat infections or recurrent throat infections, they do just as well if you leave their tonsils in. So don't expose them to the procedure and the hassle and the expense. Just let them be.
Yeah.
They will grow up to be perfectly fine adults. Oh my God, you mean we don't have to take everyone's tonsils out? No, we don't. But this is one of those things. But then I did a little bit more work, and it's coming back, and it's coming back in 2025. The number of tonsillectomies have really increased, and I'm not really sure why, but I think
it may just be as they usually say, profits. Right?
There's profit there. It's possible there's some new research, but I really doubt it. I think there is probably some specialty that would think that this is a good thing to do. And it might actually be the kind of thing that if you get done, it actually leads to other profit centers like drugs or whatever to deal with the aftermath of the surgery. I mean, that's one example of medical reversal. But
the ice cream industry really favors this too, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think that the best example of medical reversal, and I'm researching this right now for an article that I'm going to publish soon in the Brownstone, and that is on menopause. So, roll your eyes, but we're guys. We can't really talk about it with authority. But what I can talk about is the science that looked into the benefits and the harms related to hormone replacement therapy. And thank goodness for the U.S. government. The NIH funded the biggest and probably the best trial of hormone replacement therapy. And they did this in the late 90s. It was called the Women's Health Initiative, WHI. If you ever want, so it's the best, cleanest randomized trial of hormone replacement therapy. Because at that point, the belief was if women going through menopause took hormones, these are estrogen or progestin combinations and so on, if they took these drugs, they will have a reduced risk of a range of things, including heart disease and so on. And so it was believed at the time that the drugs were cardioprotective. They could not just treat the symptoms, and the symptoms of menopause can be quite miserable for many women. The night sweats, not sleeping, a range of pretty uncomfortable conditions. But it was kind of sold on don't just take the drugs for the condition, take it for the long-term benefit. And the Women's Health Initiative basically overnight found, well, they halted the study early. They had two arms of two different trials. The one trial was 16,000 patients. They halted the trial early. And that's when that happens in the drug world, when they stop a trial early, it's everyone goes in a tizzy because something big is going to happen. And then they announced that they unblinded, right? So they actually looked at the two groups and said, well, who did better? And the women who are taking the hormone replacement therapy had much higher rates of blood clots, heart attacks, forms of dementia, a range of and breast cancer. Breast cancer was one of the big things because there's certain types of breast cancer that are fed off hormones, and so that basically killed the hormone industry almost overnight. And the fact and this is a part of the article that I'm writing, is that when you look at the breast cancer rates in the U.S., the biggest change in breast cancer rates amongst women happened in 2002, 2003. Why? Because that's when women stopped taking hormone replacement therapy. The breast cancer rate in the U.S. dropped by 6 or 7% in about 2 years. Now, this, in epidemiologic terms, that's almost unheard of. I mean, nothing that we can do for almost any cancer drops the rate of that, the rate of that cancer. This is like an epidemiologic cliff. And it was because women stopped taking hormone replacement therapy. Suddenly, we are reducing the rates of breast cancer. So in many ways, it's good to know this. But in the last 5 years, especially, the Women's Health Initiative study has gotten a remake. It's got a new interpretation. There's new guidelines around whether women should be taking hormones or not. And I think the honest ones acknowledge that there is still a breast cancer risk. There's a heart attack risk. There's some suggestion that it might improve your bone density. It might actually be better for women with osteoporosis. But the key point there is that they came up with a recommendation saying women should take, if they take these drugs, they should take them for the shortest period of time for the lowest dose possible. And when you hear that kind of recommendation around a drug, red flags should be going off, because usually it's take this drug in the highest dose you can get for the longest period of time. That's where the money is. But if they're telling women only take these drugs for short periods of time in small and low doses, they're still recognizing that there are dangers. But there's a story in the New York Times, we're talking a month ago, basically saying the quoting people discrediting the Women's Health Initiative study, say, oh, that's old research. You can't really trust that. Hormones are much better than that, what that study suggests. That was flawed. And you look at this and go, who's saying this stuff? And you realize, well, there are certain professions that are really enamored with hormones. And one of them happens to be the gynecology world and the endocrinology world. They think these drugs are awesome. And so
awesome,
when I have
awesome for getting patients hooked on drugs and getting the patients attached to the doctor's office, right?
Well, yeah, yes, and awesome for certainly for the profits of the companies that make them. By the way, yeah. one of the biggest makers of the most popular hormone replacement therapy happens to be Pfizer. So they've got the PR bench strength. They got the weapons grade kind of public relations apparatus that we saw in action with COVID, and of course that's what's, I think, happening behind the scenes. This is not Alan saying women shouldn't take hormones at all. It's Alan just saying women should not trust information that they're getting that has been laundered by the pharmaceutical industry and the professions who are remaking what is probably the most damning study ever done about hormone replacement therapy.
I had a cousin who was a dentist, and a rather successful one, who before he died told me, he said, Jeffrey, I just want to tell you, my beloved cousin, I'm just going to tell you a truth. Never go to the dentist unless you have tooth pain or you need cosmetic, something done cosmetically. Otherwise, never go to the dentist. And he died sometime after that. I remember being shocked by this advice, but I've been haunted by it ever since, and I wonder a lot of dentistry, in particular about the removal of wisdom teeth, which seems to be so universal. Have you looked into that one?
Yes. Again, that's in the category of controversial. I think it's still largely done. I know my kids who are in their 20s, they had their wisdom teeth out, even though I objected. but to tell you though, the one thing that's happening in dentistry, which really bothers me, and that is the prophylactic use of X-rays. So we know that exposure to X-rays over time, it's cumulative. It'll increase slightly your risk of developing cancers, right? But if they start telling young families with young kids that you should be taking your kid to the dentist every 6 months and having X-rays
Which they
done.
want to. They put you on a subscription model. That's right.
Yeah. And so I challenged my dentist a couple of times, and I said, look, I don't have any symptoms. I don't know what kind of, and I wrote a book about medical screening, so I'm a little distrustful about getting my teeth X-rayed. I don't have any symptoms. What's the likelihood of benefit? Well, we might be able to find something that may go on to somehow hurt you somehow down the road. And I said, okay, I'm willing to take that chance. And then they said to me, you have to sign this waiver. I'm like, really? Oh yeah. The waiver essentially saying that if anything happens down the road and I'm refusing the diagnostic, the screening test. oh, I'm willing to do that. It's not that it's not that I'm scared of x-rays. It's just, I don't really, I don't see the benefit of it. So why would even if the risk was zero, why would you bother? Right. I don't know why your cousin thinks dentistry is so bad, though. I can think of other professions that are
Well, he was a
higher up
dentist.
the list.
Well, he was a dentist, so he was kind of scandalized and mortified that he'd gotten rich, doing dumb things to people, and just wanted to tell his. So what do you think is a much? Yeah, in a sense, I know what you mean. Like dentists at least seem to do real stuff.
Yeah, and usually they're not making stuff up, but though most of us are. There was a term I used when I did a radio show about consumer drug information, and I said we are naked in the pharmaceutical marketplace. Like, we just don't know. And I would say, I've been a researcher for 30 years. I'm totally naked in the dentistry marketplace. They can say, oh, there's something wrong with this truth. I got to take your, I might want to get a second opinion.
Yeah.
I think, by the way, one thing that I do know, and I experienced this with my own kids, is that the fear put into parents about their kids' teeth is intense. You go to the dentist and they go, oh, he's got a little bit of an overbite, braces. And, I don't know what it's like in the US, but in Canada, braces are really expensive. And, your insurance is only going to cover part of it. And so there's this kind of funnel into get the kids braces. So we did a kind of a controlled experiment. The first kid, we were told by the orthodontist, you got to get braces. The first kid got the braces, whatever, she wore them for a year. Second kid, I said, no, I don't think so. He had big teeth and a small head, and his head was going to grow bigger. He's 12 years old. I said, well, I think we'll hold off on the second one. Kids grow up, their teeth are fine, so. No, I think that but as a parent, you would feel completely irresponsible if your kid grows up with crooked teeth and you could have done something about it. I'm kind of old school. I'm thinking, if the kid's 18 years old and got crooked teeth, then he can go to the dentist and get the braces.
Get his teeth straightened out. Well, so what are to your mind some better examples of disease mongering then?
Oh, I mean, there's some examples that are really good. They worked 15 years ago. They wouldn't work today. And one was the creation of female sexual dysfunction. So we have a chapter in that book, and that we actually were kind of we were like observers in the bleachers, watching the pharmaceutical industry create this disease, hold these conferences in locations like Paris or Barcelona, and bring all these sexologists and others together, because the problem is that there's two problems. One was there was actually a relatively effective drug for men for the sexual dysfunction problem that men usually get, which is erectile dysfunction. And that we could talk about that at some length, but the drug to some degree worked for that problem. But that market's only half the population. We really need something. And the idea that these researchers were getting together to create a market for female sexual dysfunction was fascinating, because they had to define it. Like, what does it mean to be, and there were commentators writing things like how do you define female sexual dysfunction? One way is you say, not tonight, honey, I have a headache. So is a headache a form of sexual dysfunction in women? So there was a lot of money, a lot of energy, a lot of, we'll just say the narrative was about, we need equality when it comes to medical research. The men have their drug, but there's no drug for women, without anybody asking the question, like, maybe sexuality is a little bit more complicated for women. For men, it's a mechanical plumbing problem. For women, it's not a plumbing. I mean, plumbing might be part of it, but it's more socio-emotional. It's relationship based. It's trust. Like there's millions of dials and switches that go on, I think, when it comes to female sexual function compared to men's. Okay, I'm being a little trivial here, but the point was they had to try to find something that they could modify. And lo and behold, there are many companies working on this. There was a couple of drugs, one that was launched, and it was a patch, and it delivered some level of hormone into the woman's bloodstream, which had some, apparently when they tested it, I think it would increase the number of successful sexual episodes by 1 per month, something like that. That was the range of benefit. That drug also caused some fairly significant side effects as well, and including you couldn't drink it with wine or alcohol. You're not supposed to have alcohol with this drug. So, the one drug that we know probably increases certainly desire is alcohol. And of course, you can't have it with this. So that the pharmaceutical industry had a field day on that, and it was just a little too obvious what was going on. And that drug, I don't think ever took off. I don't even think there are drugs of that nature on the market. I could be wrong, but this was a clear example. Was they're creating a market where one didn't exist before. And we actually had a quote from one of the brand managers in one of these companies who said, "We have done what is the marketer's dream." Oh, actually, that wasn't that was related to a different disease. That was related to social anxiety disorder, where the marketer, the guy who created the condition called social anxiety disorder, what we used to call ordinary shyness, now is a disorder that you could be treated with Paxil. And the lead public relations guy for the company making that, GSK, he basically told Adweek that we were able to do what is a marketer's dream. We were able to create a market that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
That's what they did with female sexual dysfunction. That's what they did with social anxiety disorder. Restless leg syndrome. I mean, I give you 26 examples. Restless leg syndrome. Yeah.
So anything that goes wrong, there's sometimes, we have this fantasy that in the late 19th century, there were peddlers with carts going from town to town selling snake oil. But you look at the kind of pharmaceuticals that are available today for every conceivable malady. I mean, we must be much worse off now than we were then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we are suffering the odor. We're suffering two ways. We're suffering because we're being told that we're sick when we're not. When we have normal changes in our bone density, or normal changes in going through menopause, or normal changes in our cholesterol, and we're told we're sick. So people live under that dark cloud, and then we have to deal with the expense, the cost, and the adverse effects related to the drugs without any measurable increase in the quality and length of our lives.
Do you have examples of where a machine was invented and then a diagnostic protocol manufactured to accommodate the use of the machine? I'm thinking in particular of colonoscopies.
Yeah, that's more of a tool that's more of a screening tool, though it does lead to patients, right? So, by the way, routine colonoscopies should never be done. should never be done in asymptomatic people. There are cheaper, equally effective ways to test if you're at risk of having colon cancer than. I interviewed a lot of experts who did the colon screening, and the rate of adverse effects just due to the screening was in the neighborhood of 3 to 5%. And people sometimes getting severe tears or perforations in their bowels, which can lead to sepsis, and et cetera, et cetera. So, for every diagnostic tool, there is an appropriate group of people who could be using that test where the harms are less than the benefits. But for a lot of average healthy people, the harms exceed the benefits. colon cancer screen is a good example. I mean, probably the best example for men is the PSA test, which is the prostate specific antigen test.
Yeah.
So this is a test that can measure an antigen in a man's blood to see if they might have a higher risk of having prostate cancer. You might say, well, what's wrong with that? Then you can go in and take out their prostates. It's very controversial. And it's not very predictive. So most men, as they say, most men will die with prostate cancer, but not because of it. For most people, it's slow growing. It doesn't really cause any symptoms. And it's kind of like something burrowing in there, but is never going to go on to kill you. But when they start doing these tests and discover that you're at high risk, then it leads to a cascade of interventions. Those are often surgeries, drugs, chemotherapy. And you might say, well, what's wrong with that? I mean, you're going to save the man's life. Well, statistically, you're not saving the man's life. The man's life is going to be equally as long whether you did all the surgery and chemotherapy or didn't. What you are affecting is the man's quality of life, because a lot of men who go through that kind of surgery will end up impotent or incontinent. I had one surgeon tell me, it's like, the PSA test is not going to make you live longer. It'll just make your life feel longer. By the way, the best book written about PSA testing was by this a urologist in Southern California, and I interviewed him for the screening book, and the name of his book was "The Invasion of the Prostate Snatchers."
Oh, that's great.
And he said the PSA test is the bait that we hold out so that the surgeons can come in and remove your prostate with a robot. Interesting. Yeah, and this is a urologist saying this, looking at the data on who benefits and who is harmed by that kind of treatment.
This whole discussion is making me outraged about these wellness checkups, which I don't know what goes on in Canada, but in the U.S., we had a medical insurance reform, like 10 years ago, that created defined benefits packages that were just elaborate. So here's your insurance, and here's all the things that it covers, and it seems like it would cover everything in the world. And if you didn't want that, it's too bad. You have to buy that anyway. Well, recently, the Republicans, in their infinite wisdom, permitted the insurance companies to change that a little bit and have a package that's just for catastrophic purposes only, and which is great. But I couldn't understand why the premiums didn't seem to be that much lower than they were before, because if you're covering much less. Then I realized a critical thing about these catastrophic packages: they all require they're all required to cover constant, unrelenting wellness checkups. And like wellness checkups are the key thing. It's like, okay, we're only going to cover this, but of course we're going to cover wellness checkups because that's a good investment in your health, whereas everything else is just an expenditure. This is investment, right? So the wellness checkup is like just somehow like it's not possible in the U.S. to buy health insurance that doesn't have baked in wellness checkups like every 6 months or something. It's absurd.
It is absurd, and I mean, you'd think you should be able to buy sort of the basic bones insurance that, as you say, deal with catastrophic stuff, but it doesn't pay for all the fluff. I mean, like for example, if you're an insurance body that's covering, like we have an employer, we have a form of national health care, but we also have employer-sponsored health care. So your employer buys insurance on your behalf, you pay part of it and stuff. And those programs, when we've studied this, they pay for way more things than the public pays for. I mean, the public plan is quite selective about what they deem to be appropriate things to pay for. And the U.S. actually has a very good model. It's called Veterans Affairs. Veterans Affairs, I mean, probably not as good as it could be, but they make qualitative decisions around what they're going to pay for, and based on science, based on good evidence, based on the likelihood of benefit. And so I think that that's the ideal thing. I mean, this is cost of healthcare, as you know, around the world is going crazy, and it's driving people into making some very bad decisions. But if you had an insurer that said, we're not going to pay for the fluff that's actually going to just generate more patients. We're not going to pay for the wellness check. If you want one, you can pay for that yourself. We're not going to pay for Ozempic for someone who wants to look nicer in a bathing suit in the summer. We're not, so if they actually made these kinds of, we're not going to pay for more than 3 years of coverage for hormone replacement therapy, for example, because we know that the longer term that you take these drugs, the higher risk you're going to be having of developing certain diseases. So, they could make decisions based on science, based on, good actuarial likelihood of benefit, but they don't, because there's just too much money in it.
Yeah. And this is, I think, the goal of every pharmaceutical company, isn't it? To make sure that they get listed as part of a defined benefits package by the major insurers.
Oh yeah. When you hear the drug executives talk about this, I mean, that's not the biggest step. The biggest step is getting it approved by the FDA for something. Doesn't matter what it gets approved for. It's got to get it approved for something, because then they can market it, widely. I had one pharmaceutical executive say to me, when we're at the FDA, we go to war for the label. We go to war for the label. And I'm like, really? What does that mean? Well, it means that if they can get at least one indication on the label that they can market their drug for, that's all they want. And it's about getting the license to sell the drug. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to getting a big managed insurer involved. They would go to war to make sure that the drug looks as good as possible so that it gets covered.
Yeah, it's highly suspicious. This has now profoundly affected veterinary care, by the way. So that every single pet you take it in is it's presumed to be gravely ill. So
yeah. The vets don't like me either. I mean, I haven't written about veterinary medicine, but can I tell you one anecdote?
Yeah.
I took my cat to the vet. Okay, this is 15 years ago, and the vet says, "Oh, your cat's kind of behind in his shots." I said, well, "What does he need?" "Well, he needs a rabies shot." I said, so I live on southern Vancouver Island. I said, "What's the incidence of rabies in Vancouver Island?" He said, "Well, I'm not sure." "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "When was the last time there was a documented case of rabies in this island, on this island that I live in?" And he said, "Well, I heard of a case," and he mentioned some place that was like 100 miles away and it happened 30 years ago. I said, "Well, if rabies is that rare that you can't think of a incident that has affected any animal here, then I think the rabies shot's useless." So I refused the rabies shot. Yeah. I mean, again, it comes
I've got
down
an
to
even better story. We live in a country that, and by the way, this has been true since something like the 19th century. That rabies fears are overwhelming in the Commonwealth and the United States, because it's like 100% fatality rate. So this is word rabies is
right.
It's been like a century and a half of complete terror in everybody.
Yeah.
And even though it's virtually non-existent in real life, but there it is. But in the U.S., there was one study that said that the antibodies wear out after 7 years. Okay, this is it becomes a gold mine for industry. It's like, okay, now you don't want to bump up against that 7-year period. So really, you need a rabies booster every 3 years. All right. So my poor dog, I just didn't want him to get yet another rabies exam. So I got a titer test. It showed that this puppy had 7 times or 10 times as many antibodies for rabies as it would ever need to ward off the thing, right? So I figured, well, this is the magic ticket, right? So I'm waving it around at veterinary clinics around town. Nobody would pay any attention to it. This is an actual titer test showing that this dog had mega antibodies to rabies. Nobody cares. They don't care. It means nothing to them. At some point, you just want to scream. So there's not really any science here, is there?
No. Follow the money, honey.
Now, you're writing about GLP-1s recently, too.
Yeah.
Am I saying that correct? GLP-1s?
GLP-1s.
Yeah. That you're very concerned that in a few years, people are going to wake up and suddenly overwhelmed with side effects they hadn't anticipated.
Yeah, and I think we're already seeing that. I mean, some minor, some fairly serious, and also, again, you don't really see how bad the side effect, how many people are affected until the larger population starts using these drugs. And I'll tell you what's going to happen. It's in the news all the time here in Canada, but eventually, and fairly close, the patents will expire on Ozempic or Wegovy, whatever they're called. And so generic companies are rushing in. There are numerous generic companies who are applying for licenses in Canada. So instead of paying, to be honest, I didn't even know the price. Let's say instead of paying $2,000 a month, it's only $200 a month. So suddenly you're going to get a huge explosion of people using these drugs that the reason they didn't use them in the past is because they couldn't afford them, or they were covered by a health program that wouldn't cover them for them. So when that happens, I think that the dam is going to break, and we're going to discover that once you start using these drugs in tens, hundreds of millions of people, you're going to be causing a fairly serious impact on public health. Yeah.
And what do you think the most likely effects, adverse effects are going to be from these drugs?
Yeah, I mean, again, we don't know. It's a little too early. There's clearly I mean, they are testing these drugs and making claims right now that are preposterous, in my opinion. They're saying these drugs are going to reduce heart disease, cancers. They're being painted as being sort of these panaceas for a lot of diseases. Clearly, the pancreas is involved. And as you know, when you start tampering with the pancreas, if there's even a slight shift in the rate of pancreatic cancers related to these drugs, that cancer is almost universally fatal. And so I think there's that problem. There's also just the idea that whatever happened to us accepting people being in different sizes, so there's a cultural impact. So people come in different shapes and sizes. Yes, maybe if someone is extremely grossly obese and has tried everything, you'd say, well, this might be the last thing that you should try before whatever bariatric surgery, or for example. But again, a drug that's useful for a very small portion of the population suddenly gets used
by the whole population. Well, this really does speak to me, I mean, to a weird thing we're facing, because we have something like a third of the population that doesn't have to move a muscle ever.
Yeah.
You just fall out of bed and open up your laptop, and then convert your laptop to a movie machine for the evening and then go back to bed, right? This is every day. At the same time, we have more voluminous access to crappier food than ever. And so, of course, everybody's getting as big as a house. So it's hardly a shock. But so it seems like the right answer would be something like eat right and exercise. I'm just throwing it out there.
But that's it. But I also would go a bit further than that. I would say we kind of have to re-engineer our lives. I mean, humans are made for movement. Throughout your age, you're made to move. That's how one of the main ways you stay healthy is by moving. Even when you're old, they get old people walking around the nursing home because a little bit of movement is good for everything, not just your weight, but for your metabolism, your brain, for your skin, for everything. And so if we engineer movement out of our lives where we're build our cities, so we're addicted. We're dependent on cars. We don't walk to public transit. We are, maybe we will have the fortitude to have a membership for the gym, and we might go, but I don't think sports is the answer to obesity. Movement is the answer to obesity, and engineering it into your life. Like I live in a city. I got a car parked out, but I can ride my bike everywhere. I can, and I do. And so the car sits there. I might use it on the weekends. And so just the way I'm living, it's a very active kind of life. And I think you're the same way, Jeffrey. You probably walk to the store and so on, right?
Yeah. And, I tell you something else that's very interesting, that we used to have traditions, cultural traditions of feast and famine. That's not the right word, but there's a reason why during the winter times there was a tradition where people would hang around indoors with family and gobble down, Christmas puddings and that sort of thing. But then soon after that, you're suddenly confronted with, 40 days of Lent, wherein, it's like one meal a day and no indulgence, and now you're supposed to sacrifice, leading to the new feast, which would be the Great Spring Feast. So we had patterns and rhythms, but of living, but at some point, and I think this has been fairly recently, there's just been this a new culture where there's never an occasion or a season where you should ever dial it back, ever.
Right. It's all about taking more in, right?
Yeah. So it's very strange. So it seems like, but there's no money and the liturgical calendar, right? But there's a lot of money in Ozempic.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, Ozempic is really kind of the tip of the iceberg, but as you know, there are so many people on the weight loss bandwagon. It's a huge bandwagon. It's a big market. I mean, the obesity guidelines in the US, they basically rewrote the definition of obesity, and the new definition would classify something like 80% of Americans as obese.
That sounds about right.
That's 250 million people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that can't be true. Well,
So you classify people as obese, and then you have the fix. So it's the same old racket. It's just like, you're sick. Here's your cure, right?
And some people, as you know, you probably have friends as I do. They're just big people. I mean, they're healthy. They're just large people, and people come in different shapes and sizes. You shouldn't medicalize someone just because they're large. I mean, what if we did that for tall people? I got this friend who's 6'5". He's huge. He's 6'6". He's like a foot taller than me. And what if we medicalize him? It's like, boy, you should take a drug to bring your size down a little bit, because you're not really fitting in here.
Well, that I can imagine a company could make bank doing that. So right. Well, Alan, it's so wonderful to have you as a Brownstone Fellow, and I'm so glad to help welcome you into our community. And I look forward to the next time we see you. I don't know when that's going to be, but we'll make it happen one way or the other. And we look forward to all your articles on Brownstone. And thanks so much for spending time with me today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.